Welcome to Worth the War. My name is Kimmy. Worth the War is here to prepare people for healthy love and relationship and how to avoid abuse. If you think we can do a better job with love and relationship than we're doing in the modern culture, you have found the perfect channel for you. We hope that you'll subscribe and join our group. About half the people who watch our videos actually are not subscribed, so it would mean a ton to us if you would join us and join our community by subscribing so that you would get our current videos as well as help us to develop a community that's standing up for healthy love and relationship. When something happens in the news cycle that is related to relationship abuse, I always take note because you can always get a real sense of how people respond to these stories as to where they are when it comes to understanding what abuse is. This week in the news, an American actress, Evan Rachel Wood, has accused Marilyn Manson, who's a theatrical singer who's in his early to mid-50s, of grooming her and abusing her. And alongside of her, there were 3 other women who have come forward and given their names and given pretty similar stories about their relationship with this singer. Where this affects us when it comes to figuring out what is healthy in love and relationship is how is culture responding when someone steps up and says, I was abused. One of the things that we've done at Worth the War, both here and in our articles, have been to prepare people for how to prevent the second wave of abuse that happens when someone finally gets the guts to name their abuser. Often the people who have been abused are in love with the person that abused them. People who have never been through that just don't understand that. But if they're still connected, it's going to take time for them to get far enough away to be able to admit what happened to them, to themselves first and then to other people. When it comes to a celebrity, you've got a power structure in place that essentially, if he is the abuser that she claims that he is and that these other women have claimed that he is, he's going to have the power to try to silence her. We can set all that aside. That actually isn't the part about these situations that are the hardest to watch. The hardest for me to watch are reading the comments. When one of these stories drops, it never fails to amaze me how quickly, I don't know if it's innocence or if it's a large group of people that have been abusers, but they immediately jump to why she would do it now, what she gets out of doing it, or in the case of a man being abused, what he's getting out of the timing of it. The victim blaming culture, unfortunately, is alive and well against all of the kind of evidence that we have that show, in fact, I'll put the study down below, that only between 2 and 10% of rape allegations, abuse allegations are contrived or created. We know that people generally wrestle with bringing out allegations of somebody hurting them. And the reason for that is often those people matter to them. It gets confused to them how they could have gotten where they were. Abuse is something that the average person simply cannot understand how somebody would want to cause pain to someone that they supposedly love, that they share an intimate life with, that they share a supposed future with. That lack of knowledge, I believe, is the driving force for a lot of these comments because they just simply don't believe that if they wouldn't do it to someone, that nobody else would. Let's step back for a moment and think about victim blaming as we look at this story about Ms. Wood and Mr. Manson and kind of say, what's going on with victim blaming in our culture today? And sadly, we've covered intimate partner violence and the numbers are staggering. 1 out of 4 women and 1 out of 10 men will be victims from their intimate partner of abuse and sexual abuse and other forms of mental and physical and emotional abuse. When we look at numbers like that, we've got to stop thinking this happens to everybody else and realize it happens to people in our circle. Here are some things that contribute to victim blaming in our culture today. One of the toughest lessons that I've had to see is that people who have been victims of domestic and intimate partner violence often blame themselves. They've listened to how it's their fault or they should have done something different, said something different, they should have been more communicative, they should have been more withdrawn. The list is so long of how they somehow contributed to abuse. And yet, all of us, especially people commenting on these stories, need to understand abuse is never an inside job. Abuse always is visited from the outside of the person, from the abuser to them. There are no excuses for abuse. There are no reasons that people give it or people would accept it. And the sooner that we understand that, the sooner that we can stop people from having to do the great wrestling of how much of this is my fault. Abuse is never your fault. If that's our only starting point, we have the ability from that position to be an advocate for victims. We understand when we're in a chat thread after a news article or we're at a party, there are certain things that are said that will immediately show that somebody is engaging in victim blaming. And we may or may not know the situation or the facts of something, but victim blaming, as long as it is allowed to exist in the light of day, will always make it harder for an actual survivor to thrive and to get their feet back on the ground after being abused by someone they care about. So let's think of some practical ways that we can be advocates to prevent victim blaming. So in this situation or many others, we actually leave the room open for justice to prevail and not mob mentality. The first thing that we can do is be an active voice in the process. Whether it's somebody at dinner saying, well, I'm sure she got money out of it, or why did it take them so long to come out with it, we have the ability, without creating a huge scene, to say, you know, if you haven't walked in those shoes, you really don't know. Or, you know, statistically speaking, 2 to 10% actually would ever put themselves on the line and lie about something like that. By responding at all, you start this process of being an advocate for the victim. The next thing we can do is really point out when we hear objectifying language, whether it's a woman and her physicality, or it's a man for what he offers, or it could be any combination of the above. Objectifying language only feeds an abusive mentality. So we can step back and say, you know, that's not really appropriate, or yeah, that's just not something I'd ever want to say about somebody that I know, so I'm not going to say it about them. The ability to objectify feeds into an abuser's psyche. So let's put a stop to objectifying language. One of the main ways that we engage in victim blaming is to kind of sense that that's them, that's not me. It's a lack of empathy for the fact that good people get abused by people all the time. And we don't want to see that. Maybe it's just too painful. Maybe it's too close to the quick. I don't know. So if we want to support people who have been through abuse, as well as be able to kind of squelch the victim blaming that goes on in culture today, the first step is to realize it could absolutely happen to any of us. And second of all, that's the whole reason that WorththeWar is here, is if you're not equipped to be able to respond to the kind of darkness that comes out of an abusive individual and how they're groomed to receive it and how it kind of plays itself out, you probably shouldn't be super opinionated on what somebody's story is. Certainly shouldn't feel comfortable out in public calling somebody out for being dishonest when you literally have no way to prove that. The best rule of thumb that I can think of that will help quell a lot of victim blaming is just to have a position of empathy, a position of understanding that you may not understand what they've been through, but for them to get to the point where they're sharing their story, it's a very vulnerable place for them. So to actually care more about their situation than our assessment of it is a great way to begin the path of stopping victim blaming, and you'll be able to identify it faster in people that have no empathy for people that have gone through the hard work of sharing their intimate stories so that they might have some semblance of peace, and often to be able to prevent the abuse of other people. So tying up this approach to victim blaming, which is more rooted in empathy than it is in judgment, we actually have this really great outcome, which is when people see that we are supporting and we're pushing back on victim blaming, we open the doors for other survivors to walk through and begin their healing process. When we raise our voices, healing can begin. So let's really think about our circles, our discussions, and when we recognize and we identify victim blaming, let's push it down. In the case of this actress, she literally had 3 people that could support her history with this singer. Not everybody has that. Not everybody should need that to be able to raise their voice against abuse. So let's be a more empathetic landing place for survivors so that we can have a healthier step forward for those little ones that are coming up now to know abuse will never be tolerated. It's always something that comes from the outside, and we together as a community can shed some light on it so that we get these numbers down. After all, I can't imagine a better legacy to leave the generations that will follow us than healthy love and relationship, and that we would put an end to victim blaming where it stands. Thank you for taking the time to being here. We hope that you'll join our community and fight for healthy love and relationship. Have a great rest of your day.